Brian Blasi, South Central.
Here and also with us is Commissioner Mitch Wardell from Werfenau County.
Thank you. Ron Cook, Southeast.
Here.
Colton Black, Southern Ute. Heather Alvarez, Southwest. John Becker, Upper Front Range. Kevin Ross, Upper Front Range.
I'm here. Thanks, Darius.
Thank you. Manuel Hart, Ute Mountain Ute. Bernadette Cuthair, Ute Mountain Ute. Brendan Adams, Ute Mountain Ute. Vice Chair Williams, Pikes Peak.
I am here, as is John Leosatos from PPACG.
And finally, Chair Beatty, Eastern TPR.
Yep, I'm here.
We do
I
have
don't
a quorum.
see any of my other reps here, so.
We do have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. All right, up next will be approval of our 2024 meeting minutes. Should have all received that in the packet. I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Commissioner Williams, second.
Been moved and seconded. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, are there any people in opposition of approval of the minutes? Seeing and hearing none, we'll approve the minutes. Okay, up next, Terman. Is he on, or are we going to have his report later?
Well, we will have his report later. He is not on yet, Mr. Chair.
Okay, all righty. All right, commission report. Last two meetings were fairly light. November, there was discussion about Burnham Yard and what they were going to be doing with it. They're looking to sell off most of it, but do some work to alleviate some of the issues in that area for transit and possibly future transit development in that area. You can review the GC minutes for all the details on that. Also in November was the budget workshop, as we had been alerted to in our November STAC meeting. There was a governor's proposed budget cuts. As that's moving forward, we'll hear about that in our legislative update on where that's at and what they're looking at doing with the budget cuts and trying to replace funding for that. Also in November was the 1601 for the Greeley US 34 interchange request. A very good presentation and looking at how to try to increase transit along with that new interchange to alleviate traffic issues. And then also they're looking at build back bond refinancing for the bridge and tunnel enterprise. And most everything else was pretty normal. One of the public comments at that meeting was from the Asphalt Association, and they mentioned that there was less asphalt purchased by CDOT last year, which kind of indicates that we're not getting as many miles of road treated with asphalt or not as robust treatments on our roadways. So that's still something as we move forward with maintenance and things. We hope to find ways to improve that long-term maintenance of our state highways. The December meeting was very short. Was just a half day. They had the Pikes Peak Area Council of Government greenhouse gas report in the workshop. More discussion on the Burnham Yard line easements. And that was pretty much it for the workshops, and the regular meeting did not have a whole lot in it either. So that was really short going through the holidays. So any questions or comments for me on transportation report? Okay. Up next, we'll start through our TPR representatives. Central Front Range.
Hey, good morning, Dwayne McFall again. We have a TPR meeting Monday, where we'll elect leadership again and then go through the agenda. We did send out a call for MMOF applications. Those drafts are due January 24th. So we're going to kick that off. We're going to talk about that at our meeting Monday as well. Getting some snow. Appreciate CDOT's work on Highway 50 the other day. It was pretty slick, so appreciate what happened. Thank you.
Okay, Grand Valley.
All right, good morning. Thank you. So we didn't have a board meeting in December, but we will be having one in January, and we'll be requesting extension for our long range plan at that meeting. Are making some progress on our greenhouse gas analysis, but still haven't been able to do a run yet. We also spent a lot of December going to each of the boards in our area to adopt our Mesa County Safety Action Plan, and had a lot of great support for that, and looking forward to seeking additional funding for the implementation of that plan. And then I think some really good news for Mesa County in our area is that they were awarded $22 million for a RAISE grant for upgrading a multimodal corridor through our community. And then on the transit side, we are now vertical on our fleet maintenance facility, and I think about 50% through construction on that. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Greater Denver, Steve. Or Ron, either one for Greater Denver.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, can hear you now.
So my apologies. At the November meeting, Dr. Cog approved amendments to the TIP program, which is our transportation improvement program. That included some addition of the CDOT Region 4 surface treatment pool projects, as well as ADA projects, along with federal discretionary grant awards sponsored by CDOT Region 4, i.e. specifically US 287. Also including Aurora's Box Elder Crossing, Boulder Safe Streets, Golden, Lena Gulch, and Denver's Sanderson Gulch. So we were excited about that. And then, of course, when we went into December, and the board approved some awards for the Dr. Cog's Livable Centers Small Area Planning Program and the Innovative Mobility Program. We also reviewed more TIP project delays that we do, kind of make sure that things aren't just sitting there stagnant. And then we got a presentation regarding our congestion report. So that's it.
Okay. Gunnison Valley, Vince.
Morning. We're right in the middle of trying to get our planning together. We've had 2 meetings so far, and we're moving on to number 3, which will be in February 13th, I think. We're also working on the MMOF. A call for projects has been sent out, and we're working on a number of different things. I want to make sure everybody knows that Highway 50 over Blue Mesa, both bridges are open in both directions. So we're happy about that. There's no more indication of any kind of building around there, but I do know that they have to come back in the spring to paint all the stuff they did. So we're still trying to figure out what the spring is going to be like in terms of getting some construction projects together. But other than that, we're moving along. Got a lot of snow.
Intermountain, Brian.
Yes, thanks, Gary. Brian Pettit, Chair of the Intermountain Transportation Planning Region. We are moving through the planning effort as well. We had an executive committee meeting, including all the regional transit providers and the 5 county representatives. We put together a priority list last month. That will go to the TPR next week for hopefully a formal vote and ratification of our planning priorities for that planning effort. In that meeting, we'll also elect a new chair and vice chair. So we'll see how that goes. But other than that, we did extend the MMOF deadline because we didn't have enough applications come in to cover the amount of money available. So we did back it up a little bit and open it up for people again. And we'll see how that goes as well. But that's all I have for now, Gary. Thank you.
North Front Range. Anybody come on?
Yeah, Paul Sizemore with North Front Range here. So in December, our planning council held elections, and so we've got a new set of officers. Our new council chair is Johnny Olson, and our vice chair is Kristen Stevens. That means our previous chair, Mayor Pro Tem John Mallow, moves into our past chair position. At that December meeting, council also approved a budget amendment to our UPWP to get us into compliance with some comments from FHWA, and that has since been accepted by FHWA. December also was the month that our new transportation management organization for the region, GoNoco 34, met and elected its officers. It's also now incorporated as a nonprofit. And then this month, the TMO board is going to be meeting to adopt its bylaws. So these are all pretty significant milestones as that TMO gets up and running. Because of the holiday, our January meeting got pushed back by a week. And so we're doing that meeting this evening, and we'll have updates on that for you for next month.
Okay. Northwest, Brian.
Hi, everybody. Brian Cirkvenik, Chair for Northwest CPR. Last meeting that we had, we voted in our transit agency calculation, I guess, giving 0.2% of a vote to each of the 5 counties' transit agencies. So now in this next meeting, which is next week, we are going to put that into our IGA, and then we are also entertaining changing our overall chair and vice chair to a 2-year position. Heather Sloop, former chair, and I both thought it was kind of silly that we would have elections every 4 meetings. So yeah, hopefully moving that to a 2-year position moving forward. In our next meeting as well, we'll be working on the next 10-year plan, project prioritization plan. So I'm going to be trying to do some editing to the old plan that was done 5 years ago and bring it up to date so that we can add new projects. And that's all I've got.
Pikes Peak, Holly. Step away.
No, sorry, I'm
Okay.
here. I totally missed it. We have, yesterday, we opened public hearing for our 2050 long-range transportation plan. It's a very enjoyable sleep method of 500 pages of reading. And so we've opened that. And then we had a successful greenhouse gas presentation from the Transportation Commission in December. And then that was pretty much all we did. Our projects are continuing on, but it's just winter time. But right now our big thing was the 2050 long range transportation plan. So that was it.
Okay.
Can I add, Gary, that we did have our elections, and Holly is now the chair of PPACG.
Yeah, I get to chair the PPACG, so that'll be a lot of fun. So thank you, John. I forgot that.
Okay, up next is Pueblo. Eva.
Yeah, sure. So our big, huge project got under construction. We had our ground opening, I guess is what you call it. Herman came down, so it was nice to see him. That's a US 50 and I-25 interchange. We're working still on the Medal of Honor Boulevard, which is the connection from Pueblo West to Pueblo. And that's about 27.5% complete. We're also going to be electing 2 new county commissioners. So probably, I don't know if there'll be a new STAC chair, just because their meetings usually conflict with this time, but it'll be nice to see some new faces on our board. Also, last month, our TAC finally adopted our bylaws. Our TAC did not have bylaws, and so it took about almost 2 years to a year and a half to write the bylaws, but I think it'll be a nice new addition, give some accountability to our members, and we're looking forward to starting with that. Thank you. That's it.
Right, San Luis Valley. Vern?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. We haven't had a TPR meeting since our last STAC meeting, but we're moving through the planning process, and that's kind of what we're focused on right now. Could use some more snow down here.
Okay, South Central.
Good morning. This is Brian Blasey, South Central TPR. The bridge on I-25 southbound is complete at Walsenburg. So the South Central TPR will be meeting on January 23rd as a work session to work on the prioritizing projects, and also as a new member training and orientation. We'll have our regular South Central TPR meeting on February 20th, and we'll do officer elections then. Thank you.
Southeast, Ron.
Stephanie's on here with us too. Working on Southeast TPR priority list for the upcoming TPR meeting, which is on January 29th. The regional transit is working as well, and connectivity with the local transits through the regional software platform, allowing riders and drivers and dispatchers to see available transit across the counties. And as mentioned, our next TPR meeting is January 29th, and we'll have our reorganization. Thank you.
Southern Ute join. See any? Southwest, Heather.
Hi, Gary. I'm not seeing Heather on here, so I can give a quick update for Southwest. So we've had 3 of our 2050 plan meetings, making good progress on that. We anticipate being able to make recommendations to our TPR for a vote at the February meeting. And then we are also into our MMOF process. All of our preliminary projects have been submitted to CDOT for review. And then we've had turnover with some of the county commissioners that are representing, I think, Dolores County. So we are waiting to see who our next representative on the TPR will be from there. That's pretty much it from our region.
For Front Range, Kevin.
Thank you. We had elections for new chairs, so I will be the chair of the Upper Front Range going forth for this year, and Commissioner Kristen Stevens from Lemmer County will be the vice chair, and I will be the STAC rep, and she'll be my backup. We had a 2050 plan presentation, kind of like everybody else has. We also been working on our MMOF funding. We've had all our presentations in. We've actually been able to hear presentations, and we'll be announcing our award recipients in regards to the MMOF funding coming out here. So that's exciting. We're cruising along, and that's all I have today.
Last one, Ute Mountain. Anybody get on from there? Seeing none. Eastern TPR, we had our TPR meeting in December, first part of December. And of course, was working on our planning. Struggling with trying to figure out how we can work on getting projects that actually do improvements and not just the maintenance type projects, which are sorely needed throughout our region. So we're working on a list and have a survey out that's due to be turned in by Monday for trying to prioritize our projects. We also are moving forward with our MMOF call for projects that just opened up for our region. So that'll be happening. And then our next meeting will also be electing a co-chair replacement to replace Chris Richardson, which is now in the legislature. So that's it for our region. And we don't have any federal updates because it's a federal holiday, so we don't have any federal reps on today. So we'll be moving on to legislative reports. Is Emily up? There she is.
Hi, all. Apologies that I'm in my car today. The governor is giving his annual State of the State address. So after I give this update, I'm going to run in and check in at the Capitol. So we kicked off legislative session yesterday. We were officially in the middle of or amidst the 2025 session. I did see about 130 bills and resolutions have already been introduced. Out of those, we're so far tracking, I want to say 5 or 6. The majority of those being the TLRC bills that we saw over the interim that I've mentioned before on these calls. As Gary mentioned, we're continuing to very closely track the budget. That's really going to be the main theme for my session, as well as a lot of the other liaison sessions. It's continuing to be a pretty tight budget outlook. I believe we've presented in the past on the 2 budget balancing measures that were included in the governor's budget. In addition to that, we have been stewing on other opportunities to find new revenue and continue to prioritize funding for maintenance and asset management. The proposal we presented to TC included a 2-cent diesel fee as well as a registration fee. I don't want to get too much into the details of that because we've gotten a lot of different feedback since we've put out that initial version, which was kind of what we were looking for, is let's put out this version and let's kind of see, what our different stakeholders are saying. And so we're now kind of in a phase of revamping that proposal and working with the governor's office on next steps. And so as soon as we have a kind of clear picture of our next steps on that, I'll definitely come to this group and make sure you have an overview of what that bill will look like. Aside from that, though, we don't have any big legislative agenda items that are purely, a CDOT agenda item. We are the governor's office as a whole is supporting the mode choice bill that's came out of the TLRC. We also are hearing a lot about vulnerable road user funding, and that bill was introduced. Hearing a lot about wildlife crossing funding. There's a muffler bill that CMCA is working on. There's kind of a just smuttering of a lot of different pieces or a lot of different topics. Outdoor advertising is also something that's come up. And so as those bills are introduced, they'll get added to the weekly report that I'll send out every week, probably starting next week. There probably won't be one this week. But we also have a new bill tracking software that will generate some automatic reports. I know that there were some comments about potentially tweaking that report and adding some other information and making it a little bit more readable. And I'm definitely in line with that goal. And so hoping that we can be able to get a readout to everyone each week that has all of the bills that we're tracking, the latest actions, and just some notes as well of where CDOT lands on those bills. The bill to the 16th TPR bill was also introduced yesterday. That bill is about 1 page and does not direct CDOT to create a 16th TPR, but it does increase the maximum number of TPRs that are allowed in statute. So right now it's 15. It increases that to 16. And so what that bill essentially would do is kind of put it back to the Transportation Commission that if they wanted to increase the amount of TPRs, they could, but it doesn't direct them to. So that's a bill that the administration has not taken a position on either, but we're closely tracking it. Rod Pelton is the sponsor in the Senate, and then Representative Richardson, who is new to the legislature, is the sponsor in the House. So I'll definitely keep you guys apprised of that bill as well. But those are main things we're tracking, but there'll be a lot more to come in the coming weeks.
Chair, you're on mute.
Any questions or comments for Emily? Not seeing any. Jamie, you have any updates for us? Are you-
Everybody. No, I have some updates. I just had to get off mute.
Yep.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the age of the 119th Congress. They were sworn in last Friday on January 3rd. So between us and the between Congress and the state legislature, it's like the first week of school all around. As I said, sworn in on January 3rd. Colorado has 3 brand new spanking members of Congress. We have Congressman Jeff Hurd in the 3rd Congressional District, which is the western slope as well as parts of southern Colorado. That is what that's the district that Congresswoman Boebert previously served. We have Congressman Jeff Crank, who is coming in the 5th Congressional District, which is the Colorado Springs, southern Colorado area, south of the Denver metro area. That was previously Doug Lamborn's district. And then we have Congressman Gabe Evans, who is in the 8th Congressional District, which is Colorado's newest congressional district. That's the one that's in the Northeast metro area, Adams County, Weld County, some parts of Broomfield. And then we also have Congresswoman Boebert returning, but she is in the 4th Congressional District now, which is the Eastern Plains. So for the first time since we've had an 8th district, we're split down the middle between 4 Dems and 4 Republicans. So it'll be interesting. I mean, it's the Colorado delegation, so that doesn't necessarily change much. It's just interesting. We do have our 2 senators returning. They were not up for re-election this year, so we still have Senator Michael Bennet as well as Senator John Hickenlooper. Just a refresher, the 4 Dem members are Diana DeGette in the Congressional District 1, which is the Denver metro area, Joe Neguse in Congressional District 2, which is Boulder, Larimer County, north central Colorado, kind of, Jackson County, Routt County. And then we have Jason Crow in Congressional District 6, which is the Eastern Denver metro region. And then we have Congresswoman Brittany Peterson in the 7th Congressional District, which is Jeffco down through like Chaffee County, kind of, I don't know, they're all over the place, but this is sort of the central western area to the Denver metro area, if that makes sense. I don't think that's a very good descriptor, but that is what the congressional landscape looks like in Colorado this year. So currently in the House, they are still in the process of making committee assignments. So we don't know for sure yet if anyone from the Colorado House delegation will be on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. They have reappointed. The House chair is Congressman Stan Graves from Texas. He is returning. This is his 12th term chairing the House T&I committee. And then they've appointed in the minority position Democrat Rick Larson, and he is returning from last Congress as well. So there is experience on the House T&I committee in terms of the chair and the minority ranking member. So their first hearing is next Wednesday. They're calling it their organizational meeting. So they have not put out an agenda yet, presumably because they're still waiting to see who's going to be appointed to that committee. In the Senate, Senator Ted Cruz has been appointed as the Senate chair of the Senate Committee for Commerce, which transportation is part of. And then the ranking member is Senator Maria Cantwell. So they have made those committee assignments. We do not have a Colorado member on the Commerce Committee this year, which is unfortunate. Their first hearing is going to be next Wednesday, and that is going to be for the confirmation of Sean Duffy, who is President Trump's nomination for the transportation secretary. Sean Duffy is previously a congressman from Wisconsin. He served for about 8 years, I think. He was a commentator on Fox News. And for those of you that are millennials, you'll remember that he made his debut as part of the MTV's Real World cast in Boston. So if you don't remember that, then you're either too old or too young. So sorry about that. He was great. And so those are kind of the updates that I have. And then lastly, today is a National Day of Mourning for President Carter. I think his service is in process right now. And it is a federal holiday, so you probably will not be receiving mail. So just a heads up, if you wonder why you're not getting any mail, that's why. So does anyone have any questions for me?
Doesn't look like it. So thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Did Herman get back on by chance or get on yet? I have not seen him.
I am.
You are on. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm just going to give a little update mostly on the Transportation Commission meeting next week and what's expected to be on the agenda. So we have our normal budget workshop, which is going to be just a budget update for FY26 revenue forecast. But the big thing we're doing is we're applying for a federal Protect grant on avalanche mitigation. So we're asking the commission for $5.4 million from their program reserve. What we're trying to do in this $21 million Protect grant is replace our World War II howitzers to a different remote avalanche control system. The twist on this one, different than what we normally do, is if we don't get the grant, we're asking the commission to still give us the money. Usually it's, hey, if we get the grant, will you give us $5.4 million? We're asking that to be a formal transfer, because if we don't get the grant, we may work on some other grants related to avalanche mitigation or use those funds to start doing whatever mitigation we can, because corridors along I-70, US 40, they need help, and this is a way to try to start cracking into that need. We have a fuel impact enterprise workshop. I think it's just maybe our second or third workshop since that's been created. To remind you, about $10 million goes through CDOT to a few specific local governments, and then about $5 million CDOT is able to retain for freight-related improvements. So Darius and Craig Hurst will start talking about what that looks like with the commission next week. We have our speed safety camera program. We have a workshop on that. It's implementation of the speed camera program that was allowed for in the legislature. For us, it's right now it's work zones. We have one pilot that should be happening in the next couple of months, and then potentially up to 4 by the end of the year. We have a bridge and tunnel financing, bridge and tunnel enterprise financing workshop. Look back at the bonds that were just issued last year. It was $271 million in total proceeds. Last year, we're looking at another $250 million. I think in the first quarter of this calendar year. Most of that will go to the Floyd Hill project. We have an interesting workshop on a company wants to do some transmission lines on East I-76. So we have a workshop with the commission to talk about that. They have a role related to it being a public-private initiative, but it's a complicated set of things related to some of our rules. So we're working with them to try to figure out if we can make that happen. And then a couple big things. Last month, PPACG had a great presentation to the Transportation Commission on their greenhouse gas transportation report. And they're asking the commission to adopt that, and we're asking the commission to adopt that next week. So that will give them their kind of thumbs up on their 2050 plan from a greenhouse gas perspective. So that's a good deal. And then Cecil Gutierrez is going to get sworn in as our Northern Area Transportation Commissioner. You probably know him already as a CTIO board member. So he's a very familiar entity for us, and we're excited to have him on board with the Transportation Commission. And then the only other thing that I think I'll toss out there is we did receive $40 million from a grant from the feds for passing lanes in east of Pueblo County. So we're excited that we're getting that, and the Greeley Merge project is getting another federal grant as well. So that's exciting for them. I took a look. We don't have any policy directives that are headed to the Transportation Commission in the coming months that I've noticed. We are looking at some 1601 changes. That's our interchange policy and procedure. So if we continue to move on that and it becomes something that we bring to the commission, we'll bring that to you all to have a conversation about, because I think we're all interested in what new interchanges look like. So that's my report. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Herman? Comments? All righty. Not seeing any.
Thanks.
Thank you. All righty, we're early. So do we want to go on to the next item and then take a break, or take a break now, or just keep going? I think we'll go ahead and go through the STAC onboarding if there's people are good with that. So, alrighty. So Marissa, are you ready?
I am ready. Can you hear me okay?
Alrighty. Yep.
Let's see if we can get the presentation going. Switch my camera. All right, I'm going to go to the next slide. So we thought we would start this new year just with a little refresher about STAC. I know we might have some new members joining us over the next couple months, so happy to provide this presentation to your new members, or maybe this is a tool for you to equip your new members with. But just to kind of go back to some STAC 101 and why we're all here today. So the STAC, the Statewide Transportation Advisory Committee, your main purpose as a body is to advise CDOT and the Transportation Commission on the needs of the transportation system in Colorado. You review and comment on all regional transportation plans and the statewide plan. So we are in the middle of that process now. So that is a very important role that you have. The STAC bylaws, which we did a lot of work updating those bylaws recently, define the roles and responsibilities. So there's a link there if you want to read through all the bylaws. I put in some important bits from the bylaws in the next few slides. So you want to go to the next slide. So some of your roles and responsibilities are to provide expert advice and recommendations. You guys are experts for your areas, and the really truly wonderful thing about STAC is that you get to come together as a state and advocate and talk about your areas and educate about your areas. To this end, you foster collaboration. One important role you have is to provide advice to CDOT and the Transportation Commission on budgeting and funding. Again, you review and assess and provide advice on transportation plans. You help support public outreach and education, and then guide and support transportation planning, policy, and decision-making processes. Next slide. So STAC membership includes all 15 transportation planning regions. 5 of those regions are metropolitan planning organizations, and then you have 10 rural transportation planning organizations. Membership also includes the Southern Ute and the Ute Mountain Ute Indian tribes in Southwest Colorado. So each TPR appoints a voting member and alternates to the STAC. So this might be an important bullet to note, this last one, that any changes to your TPR membership, and this is in the bylaws, must be submitted to the DTD director, so Darius Pakmaz, within 30 days. If you could provide just a letter, the letter can come from your chair or really anyone in your organization, but just something formal, formal letter that tells us the name, title, mailing address, telephone number, and email address of your new STAC representative, so that we can officially make that change and note that in our documentation. Let me go to the next slide. So STAC meetings are typically held monthly at 8:30, starting at 8:30 to noon, and they're usually on the first Thursday of each month. This month is an exception with the holiday, but typically they're the first Thursday. We do hold meetings. Meetings are mostly virtual now, but with the exception of May and October. When we do hold in-person meetings, usually we have good weather in May and October, so those are really good months to meet. But we can have more in-person meetings as you would like, and that's usually at the discretion of the STAC chair. When we meet in person, they're usually held in the CDOT auditorium of our headquarters building in Denver. And then STAC meetings are open to the public. We didn't have any public comment at this meeting, but we usually allow space for public comments at the beginning of each STAC meeting. Next slide. We develop a STAC work plan at the beginning of each calendar year. The intent of this work plan is to identify areas of CDOT's work where STAC can add value, fulfill their statutory advisory role for CDOT and the commission, and just help STAC help us serve as a productive forum to exchange viewpoints from around the state and achieve consensus. I believe we implemented this work plan a couple years ago, and I think it's been really valuable for STAC to have and for CDOT to have, just to be proactive and plan ahead on what's coming on the horizon. We do really try to organize the STAC work plan in concert with the Transportation Commission schedule, so that you're seeing topics before they go to commission, so that you can have that opportunity to provide your recommendation and advice. We did include a work plan in your meeting packet, so it's in the memo if you want to see sort of a month-by-month overview of what we see on the horizon. This is, of course, flexible. This is not set in stone. So if there's items that come up, we can for sure get them added, or if the commission schedule changes, we will update that accordingly. We'll go to the next slide. We maintain a STAC webpage on the CDOT website. We try to keep this really up to date. So if you go to that webpage, you'll see the current STAC meeting materials. We try to make these available about 7 days before the next meeting. We also have an archive of past STAC meeting materials, such as our agendas, summaries, minutes, and live stream recordings of STAC meetings. We put all this, the STAC membership is on the website, and then the STAC bylaws. Let's see, what else? Is that it? That's it. Questions? Some of that was probably a refresher for many of you, but Darius.
Maybe it would be good if we could bring up the, I apologize, Aaron, I should have mentioned this, the STAC work plan, so we can see what's upcoming and see if members of the STAC have any potential topics that they would like to bring up over the next year. So we tried to, as Marissa said, anticipate what will be coming up. It's going to be a heavy year with the statewide plan and the 10-year plan afterwards, but also other updates that might be beneficial to STAC members. Of course, the budget, we know when those items come forward. But I think our main question for members of STAC, is there anything that we had forgotten that you would like to have information on? And we can see about putting this up on, putting it on the work plan and keeping an update with the website. So as you can see, in January, we're doing a lot of refreshers. In February, we'll be talking about the statewide plan vision, Transportation Vision 2035, any type of onboarding for new STAC members. We'll, of course, have the budget in March, and then April going into statewide plan winter maintenance and getting ready for the May in-person meeting, which gets into resetting for the next fiscal year. So I'll open it up for questions for Marissa and I. If there's anything we had forgotten that would be good to bring up onto the work program. We are noting, as Herman mentioned, anything from regarding potential policy directives. Unfortunately, it's kind of hard to know when specifically those will come up, but we'll keep an eye on those when they do come up for discussion at the TC. After the TC workshop, we'll bring it forward to STAC for consideration and recommendation as well.
Any comments or input on the work plan at this point? Looks like we had a comment.
I think that's a good thought, and we're happy to accommodate that, Elizabeth. So when grant deadlines that we know about, we're happy to put those in there. And I know one of the examples that you had mentioned, but happy to compile those as well and getting those available for STAC members.
Yeah, the comment was statewide grant deadline reminders like HSIP and APME. Don't even know what that one is myself. But all right.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think that's a good thought, and that probably should be at the February meeting. The interagency council discusses policy related to the greenhouse gas planning standard, and there is a representative from the rural TPRs on there. And I think because there is a term expiring in March, we will probably bring that forward in March, or excuse me, in February for discussion and recommendation for the STAC to the TTD director, myself, to appoint them to that board. So thank you. That works as well.
Holly.
Yeah, I wanted to throw this out kind of for discussion mostly. We have down here, obviously, our Pikes Peak Rural Transportation Authority. Several others have transportation authorities. The city of Colorado Springs has a sales tax that they redo roads with and such. I think it's a big concern statewide. At least it's always been a concern for me as to how, in an era when we're moving to trains and buses and trying to do more multimodal options at the state, how do we fund transportation locally? And part of my thought, because I don't know anything about like the public highway authority that was Douglas County and Adams County started way back in 20 years ago to get E470. I'm wondering if some months it would be useful to have different ways of funding transportation. Statutory, this is how we did it in El Paso County, or this is how we got E470 up in the Denver area. I just don't know as if that would be helpful in case anyone in their local area wanted to take on their own ballot issues as far as getting more money into transportation. So I'm just throwing out that out there for discussion. These would be guest speakers, not coming from CDOT necessarily, and see what people think.
Okay. Steve.
I would like to second that recommendation and supplement it. I think identifying different funding sources is a good idea, and also continuing to get a little bit more in depth and understanding of the various enterprises. We've talked about that a couple times, and I think it would be really cool for us to consistently kind of, even if it's a little bit repeated, but like bring up, okay, here are the enterprises, because it comes up every legislative session, and people are talking about, well, who makes decisions on this enterprise, who could rate it, like the legislature on this one, and like can we talk about all those different enterprise buckets and understand those a little bit more in depth. In addition to what Holly's saying is then we can add that to this growing list of the different types of tools and techniques that might be available to folks. Because I appreciate what Holly brings up is that like there's sometimes we just need a nudge or an understanding of the different buckets or entities that you can create to help us solve these problems. And it's kind of like how sometimes DOLA can help local nonprofits identify different resources. I think CDOT could be that specialized clearinghouse to support local governments to accomplish what we want. Help us, and I think that might also help with CDOT's challenge sometimes with rebuilding trust in the local communities is also serve as a resource to show them. And I think you guys already do that a lot. Don't get me wrong, but I think like really let's break it down and say like, all right, here's the different tools in the tool belt and which one applies maybe most applicable to you, then people could always follow up and get more help.
Eva.
No, I third that idea from Holly. I think that's a great idea, and I know that I think maybe it was last year when we were talking about the formulas, and we had that consultant. I know Marissa, you had brought up a couple of ideas from different states, and I thought that was really interesting. And I guess my only concern is that it's such a huge subject. That if we want to do something like that, maybe it's like a separate workshop or something like that, where we kind of talk about it and we have different panels, just because, some MPOs are a lot larger than others and TPRs. And so it might be interesting if we can create like a separate workshop. That would be my only suggestion. Thanks.
Holly, you had your hand up again. You're on mute.
My only other comment was last month or the month before, I was surprised to learn that faster fees are Tabor limited. And whereas we've got all these enterprise funds that are not Tabor impact to my knowledge. And so it would be interesting as we discuss some of these bills coming up in the state legislative session. Is it something that we could add on to say, hey, let's take faster fees and make them so they're not, put them into an enterprise or something, because that's a big source of revenue for us, and make them so they're not Tabor limited, so that they don't have to be affected by these budget cuts. So that's just something that we might want to watch out to. That's it.
Yeah, I would like to see some leadership from the legislature to actually go to the public and say, we need to get these so we can keep the revenue that we have for transportation and not have these issues of bouncing in and out of budget limits. Any other comments? Comment on the enterprises? Agree, it's hard to explain to people what they're doing and how they work. So it would be good to get more information so we can help educate. One item as we go through the planning process, is there a plan at all to have presentation to the whole stack to kind of possibly highlight where different regions may not kind of match up on corridors or things? Or how is staff planning to address that sort of an issue where there may be some disconnects on corridors between regions?
I don't know if we've gotten that far yet, but that's something we can definitely put into consideration. So right now, the placeholders in August and December are for adoptions of the plans themselves. But after meeting number 4, the round 4 with all the TPRs, would be the adoption of those regional plans, which will give the priorities of each of the regions, which will go into consideration with the 10-year plan. But that's definitely something we can add into it. We do have time reserved for every single month for a statewide plan update, depending on what topics are come up for discussion each month.
I just think that would be good for a STAC to have any conversations where people might see that there might be some disconnects between regions for corridors or things. So there'd be a way to kind of schedule that in so we actually have time to maybe make a few minor adjustments or at least acknowledgements of those disconnects in the plan. So, anything else for the work plan? All right, seeing none. Guess we'll go on into the statewide plan update. I think we may just go ahead and barrel through everything unless people really need a break, but if you need a break, you can probably step away for a few minutes. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Marissa and I are going to jointly present on this. Aaron, are you bringing up the presentation or do you need me to? All right, thank you. We'll just give it a couple minutes. So again, some of this may be reviewed to some folks on just kind of a high-level overview of what we have done, what's being worked on, but also we'll give you an idea of where we're at right now. And most, as you've known, Marissa, I, and any of our staffs has probably been out there talking with you a lot on the development of your regional plans, which has been most of the work that's happened over the past 6 months. But we can kind of give you where we're at now, and then kind of a preview of a quick preview of how we're going to slot in the new 10-year plan at the end, with more conversations to come in future months. So, and I'm stalling for time as we get the presentation up a little bit, but we're about a third way through the process, and of course we've kicked off the plan itself, the planning cycle itself. We've had conversations with the TC, with each of the TPRs. We've had 2 rounds of meetings. The MPOs have been working on their own plans and bringing them into the fold when we discuss the actual 10-year plan as well over the next coming months. So I think with that, once it pops up, I'm going to turn it over to Marissa to do these first few slides, and then I'll carry on at the end of the presentation. Marissa.
All right, thanks, Darius. So kind of on theme, just starting at sort of the 101 level, you know, we as CDOT conduct multimodal planning activities and outreach to identify what Coloradans want from their transportation system, and then we use our 10-year plan to look at what projects will best deliver that vision. So we work with all of you at STAC and all of your you at your TPRs and the MPOs to describe our future transportation system. We look at how we might fund it and how we measure success. So just, you know, and this is actually this third bullet is part of our mission at the Division of Transportation Development, that we're, you know, dedicated to preparing Colorado's transportation system for the future through planning, analysis, and innovation. Next slide. So you just saw this map when we're talking about STAC 101, but really it's the idea to improvement planning process is built on building strong relationships, and that's why STAC is very important. That's why working with you at the MPOs and the TPRs is very important, is because we are planning for the future together and building these relationships in every corner of the state. So we work very closely with the 15 transportation planning regions, our 2 tribal nations, to identify issues. Data is a big part of this. We bring to you a lot. I think you probably have seen lots of data and maps at your TPR meetings recently, but we look at data trends and patterns. And then we want to hear your ideas and figure out, I mean, these are complex challenges that we face. So we bring data to you, we look at issues, but then we talk about how we can have some ideas to tackle these challenges and come up with a statewide plan and 10-year plan that addresses the challenges that we're seeing for transportation. We've already talked about how a member serves on STAC, so we can go to the next slide. Part of this also is engaging the public. So in addition to working with our stakeholder groups, TPRs, MPOs, STAC, we also seek input directly from community leaders and the public through community events, stakeholder meetings, county meetings. We do public surveys, online interactive maps, telephone town halls, social media. So for the 2050 long range plan that we're building, we'll be having some transportation commissioner telephone town halls, hopefully soon in the next month or two, to bolster and inform the planning process. We'll also be launching a public survey here in the next couple months as well, to get this public engagement piece for the some examples of public engagement for the 2050 plan. If you want to go to the next slide. So some key planning documents. You want to think of this sort of as a funnel, going really long range, broad to narrow it down. We have our long range 20+ year time horizon transportation plan. So we are building the 2050 plan now. We build those 2050 regional plans first. So that's why the MPOs are working on their long range 2050 plans. We're working with the rural TPRs and developing their long range 20+ year transportation plans. And then once we have those developed for each of you, we aggregate the themes from these regional transportation plans. And that essentially goes into building the statewide transportation plan, sort of our mother plan that identifies the goals, focus areas, and priorities over, again, that time horizon of 20+ years. We also create a transit plan, which is a big component of our statewide plan, so we can be very multimodal and integrated in those efforts. Sort of a new development in the last decade for CDOT is we now have a 10-year plan that sort of takes the goals, focus areas, and priorities from these long-range visionary plans, and it is a popular plan because it identifies strategic projects that can best support that collective vision over the next decade. So we'll be diving deep into updating our 10-year plan, building out a new 10-year plan, so we have a full 10 years to look at here over the next year. Darius will talk more on that later in this presentation. So once projects become actually funded and we've identified funding, they go into our 4-year statewide transportation improvement program, also known as our STIP, and that represents, again, the funded projects over a 4-year time period. So next slide. So again, these all work together to take us from a vision to an achievable reality. So, I think I won't spend a lot of time here, but this is just sort of how everything builds on each other and how we get to funded projects. We spent a lot of time last year talking about PD14, which is the policy that establishes the framework for transportation planning. So a lot of you probably remember, Darius can probably tell you just how many months we spent working on this together with you to update our performance targets and measures. So, PD14 was updated to, I think we have this, maybe I'll skip to the next slide, to set some guiding principles for development and implementation. So we have 3 big areas that we'll be focused on for the 10-year plan and the statewide plan. The first being advancing transportation safety, the second being fixing our roads, and then the third being sustainably increasing transportation choice. So this is where we will be setting some performance measures, targets, and metrics around these 3 goals. And that's how we'll be measuring the projects that go into the 10-year plan, and then looking at, after we implement the 10-year plan, how we're measuring success. And then we have, after this presentation, I believe, Chris LaPlante, our air quality and Climate section manager will be talking to you about a refresher on the greenhouse gas planning standards. So I won't spend a ton of time on this slide, but we also have, I think you all are aware, we have a greenhouse gas planning standard that we need to adhere to when we have our statewide plan and our 10-year plan. So basically, at a high level, this means that we need to model our 10-year plan to ensure that we are compliant and we're mitigating the impacts to greenhouse gas from the transportation sector. Go to the next slide. I think where I hand it to you, Darius.
Thank you. Thank you, Marissa. Appreciate the overview. Hopefully that's helpful coming back from the holidays and we're just getting back into the planning piece. So right now, as Marissa mentioned, we're focusing on helping the rural TPRs develop their rural plans. Many of you over the next few weeks are going to be developing your project priority list and then developing your rural plans. And then we will get started on the statewide plan, which will be the mother plan and incorporate all the other items that we've been working on, the freight plan, the asset management plan, the state highway safety plan, active transportation plan. All those items will flow up into the statewide plan. But with the 10-year plan, this was originally designed to help with identify projects to be funded with Senate Bill 267, and it's become a popular way of identifying our strategic projects. And we're continuing this effort into this planning cycle, and it's been codified into our planning rules into statute as well. And this just gives you a couple of some interesting statistics on the 10-year plan. Like for the first 4 years, 100% of the projects are either complete or underway. 50% has been is either complete or is being started construction of the full 10-year plan. And the reason we do planning every 5 years is because priorities change. So we want to take a look at those out years and see, are they still priorities or do we need a change of direction? And then there is about 56 projects planned to start construction in the next construction season. If we could go to the next slide, please. And then the rural road program, which was fairly popular, began kind of in the middle of the 10-year plan, but it's been supplemented and repaving a lot of those roads throughout the state, and expect the commission to continue extending this program as part of the 10-year plan as well, identifying those poor areas of roadway and doing repavement and maintenance work. So the 10-year plan will take a look at the larger construction projects, but our maintenance forces has also been out there doing items that they can do within their statutory limits. So this just gives you a kind of a quick overview of what's been done throughout the state as part of that program in terms of miles that have been addressed and repaved. Let's go to the next slide. The 10-year plan also has numerous items that is available for folks to see the progress on there. So at the top, you can kind of see a screenshot of our accountability dashboard, which will show how much funding is associated with it, the current status, whether it's going to construction, whether it's received a grant, whether it's received local funding. So any of the high-level statistics with all of our 10-year plan projects. A quarterly update of what we colloquially call the colorful tables. It has the list of all the projects with some of the summary information. We do include an annual 10-year plan report as part of the department's budget submission. So that is available on our website right now with the current status of where things are at with construction, where things are at with funding. And just to note, with the 10-year plan, and kind of the definition of the 10-year plan project is if it's received strategic funding or not. And we're happy to get into those types of conversations if we would like to later with STAC as well on what exactly is strategic funding. And then we have an annual accomplishments report, which not only updates on the 10-year plan, but goes beyond that. What grants were received, what was done with maintenance, the winter season. That's being completed right now and should be published in the next few weeks. But there's a website to go to it, and you're able to see all that information and check back with it on a quarterly basis because they do get updated when there's a change with the commission, when we know about new construction schedules and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. We have mentioned this before, but we do want to put a plug in this again. Is the long range transportation plan data visualizer. So any of the data that we have heard after talking with planning partners throughout the state that would help with addressing some of the high level goals. We have put all this data into a data visualizer so we don't have to print out thousands and thousands of maps, and also so it's available for you to use at your leisure and be able to compare different data sets. So that's available on our statewide planning website. So folks are able to use the data whenever and be able to have conversations outside of the planning process. So it is publicly available data, but we try to combine it into a logical one-stop shop for ease of use. So, and we're continually updating that as well. So encourage everybody to go ahead and take a look at that, and you're able to see items like safety statistics, good, fair, poor roadways, where the transit routes are throughout the state, wildlife crashes, all sorts of things. So there's that. Next slide, please. And just from a high level overview of where we're at, you can kind of see we're at the end of December. We've finished meeting number 2 with our TPRs, kind of setting the stage, talking about how they want to prioritize projects, and actually doing the work of prioritizing their projects for their regional list. So we've also completed initial revenue projections, which was delivered by the Chief Financial Officer for CDOT a couple months back. The goals have been adopted for the plan. We do have an updated external website. If the Active Transportation and Safety Plan outreach and development efforts have been going forward. And what we've heard, kind of overarching themes is asset management, road conditions continue to be a big concern. We've heard about transportation safety, resilience, growth in tourism and congestions, and that's been a constant theme throughout some of our conversations. And some of our discussions have include what we plan to do with a data-informed process for project selection, making sure that folks are aware of the GHG planning standard and how that affects the development of transportation plans, and talking about a data-informed prioritization process with our planning partners, so we'll be able to explain why these projects were chosen and what they will do with the transportation system based on regional goals. And I think I have one more slide, 2 more slides. So taking that schedule, this makes it a little bit larger and easier to see. You can kind of see we're right at the TPR meeting number 3. Conduct public and stakeholder engagement, probably more heavily coordinating with our MPO partners as we get into the development of the actual statewide plan and the 10-year plan. The MPOs develop their own plans through the process that is laid out through their own boards and by federal statute, and expecting the statewide plan to be up for review later on this summer, and then getting into the 10-year plan towards the end of the year. So that is at least the plan right now. So we do have some built-in buffer time if we get behind schedule, but we've been doing pretty well so far. And the last slide is just kind of a high-level overview of what will happen when we do the new 10-year plan. So if you remember if you don't, that's fine too if you're new to this. The 10-year plan is broken up into 2 4-year prioritized plans because it's more the funding, the certainty of revenue is a little bit more. Let me rephrase this. Funding projections are a little bit more certain in the first 4 years than they are as we go out. It becomes a little bit uncertain, and that's why we do a planning process every 5 years. So we have 4-year prioritized plans nested within the 10-year plan, which align with the STIP. That's why we have that broken out. The current 10-year plan, we're in 4-year prioritized plan number 2 from fiscal years 23 through 26. And I should note that is based off of the year of funds and not necessarily the project delivery. So that's an important distinguishing factor. And then we have the out years, what we call 27 plus. What the transition will be from 27 plus based off of this new prioritization, based off of the new regional plans that are developed, based off of the new 10-year plan. It will replace 27 plus with an actual prioritized list, and we'll call 4-year prioritized plan number 1 for the new 10-year plan, which will be based off of fiscal year 27 through 36. Again, we'll have a 4-year prioritized plan number 2, which will cover years 31 through 34, and then we'll have out years again, which hopefully will be replaced with a new 10-year plan at a future planning cycle. That's kind of the transition between it. So between now and December, there's probably, in addition to the work that's being done with the TPRs and what I mentioned, the development of the statewide plan, which will set out the needs and addressing the issues. We'll be talking about the 10-year plan process and expect some of those conversations to occur with STAC in future months on how that will be done, how to get involved, working with our MPO partners, and developing that potential 10-year plan for adoption in December of this year. So I think that's the end of the presentation, but hopefully that gives a quick refresher, gives a preview of what's to come, shows where we're at right now, and just want to appreciate the conversations we've had with our local planning partners so far and expect many more over the next couple of months. We do enjoy going out and visiting different parts of the state and having those conversations with you, and we'll have more conversations with this group as well. So happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair.
Darius, this is
Any
Brian
Yeah.
over at Northwest TPR. You mentioned that you're going to be putting together the 4-year STIP and then a secondary 4 years. Are you doing those at the same time, and then are you updating the second one in 4 years, or when does that happen?
Yeah, it's a little bit. The STIP is done on an annual basis, so the STIP is supposed to be per federal statute be for 4 years. It's sort of a separate document, but it's kind of linked. So anything that gets any type of federal funding or needs to be in the STIP. In fact, all of our funding is within the STIP. So they are somewhat linked, but in the STIP we'll have everything, not just the 10-year plan. It will have what we do with our regular asset management program. We'll have what we do with our highway safety improvement program. Any types of grants that we receive outside of the 10-year plan will be included in it. So happy to do a conversation about that when we get to this year's STIP update in May and do a little bit more of a deep dive on that. So it is kind of the same, but kind of different, but those will be a little bit more static, and those will come forward for adoption at the first one at the same time with the commission in December or shortly thereafter. And then the next 4-year one probably before fiscal year 31 starts, late calendar year 30, early calendar year 31, if that makes sense.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, not seeing any others. So greenhouse gas planning.
So before we go into that, Mr. Chair, just a quick piece on the greenhouse gas planning. We're bringing forward this because it's an important consideration that wasn't implemented until midpoint of the 10-year plan that we're in. And the reason we're bringing it up is because it's designed to encourage alternative thinking in terms of planning, but it does have some reduction levels that we need to consider. And we're mainly focusing this on the rural areas of the state because that is what's required for CDOT to do the analysis on. The MPOs are required to do their own analysis on their own regional plans. But hopefully this overview will give a look into how this works. And as we develop this analysis and be able to present that, we need to make sure that we're in compliance with that. And that may make may require some different decisions within the development of the plan. So we wanted to make sure that STAC members were aware and continuing to talk about this, because it is a slightly different wrinkle from what we had. If you have been here for quite a while, what has happened in previous planning cycles. So just my quick preamble, and happy to turn it over to Crystal Plant to give the presentation.
Thank you, Darius. Can you hear me okay? Just double checking my headset here. Okay, get a thumbs up. All right, awesome. Well, appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all today. I'm Chris LaPlante. I'm the Air Quality and Climate Section Manager in the Division of Transportation Development's Environmental Programs Branch. Here today to provide you some overview and background on the greenhouse gas planning rule that Darius referenced earlier. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about what led to the development of the planning rule itself, and then we'll move into an overview of more the specifics of how the planning rule works, and then we'll tie that back in at the end of the 10-year planning process that we've been discussing today. Some key things to understand are that there have been state legislation going back to 2019, and then more recently in 2023, that established statewide, economy-wide requirements to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And those are across all sectors in the state, including transportation. So this graphic on the left gives you an idea of what those various sectors are and relative contributions to greenhouse gases here within the state of Colorado. The key here is that it established percent reduction requirements at various horizon years going out into the future. And those reductions are based on reductions from a baseline inventory from 2005. So the legislation, as many of you are probably familiar with, legislation can be fairly high level. We needed ultimately to then to start to translate into strategies for various sectors. How are we going to start to achieve actual emission reductions? And so there was an effort with the Colorado Energy Office on lead, working with all state agencies to develop what are known as the Colorado greenhouse gas roadmaps. And those documents essentially started to develop specific ideas, strategies, regulations, programs, policies that started to determine what amount of emission reductions might be achievable through various near-term strategies, with the goal of helping to facilitate within various state agencies concepts that could help to move us forward and make significant progress towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So there have been two roadmaps, one released in January of 2021 and then an update in 2024. And the key here is that in the first roadmap for transportation near-term actions, one of the concepts within that roadmap was a transportation planning rule. And ultimately, as that roadmap came out in 2021, in a similar time frame, Senate Bill 21260, the Sustainability of the Transportation System bill, that was also a major funding bill for transportation, actually turned that recommendation in the roadmap into a mandate. And so that lays the groundwork for sort of how we got started on this pathway and this rulemaking. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background on that roadmap 1.0. As I mentioned, they were looking to establish specific strategies and then estimate the level of emissions that could be achieved through those strategies. And so in order to make progress towards a 2030 horizon year for the transportation sector, there was a variety of strategies that were contemplated as near-term actions, with the totality of those strategies seeking to achieve about a 12.7 million metric ton reduction in emissions from transportation. And so this is just a quick overview of what some of those strategies are. I will note here that One of the greatest reduction strategies relates to cleaning up emissions that result from the tailpipes of vehicles, so electric vehicle and low emission vehicles. Some of these strategies are not developed directly through CDOT. CDOT is supporting some of those strategies through our electric vehicle infrastructure programs. But otherwise, other state agencies like the Air Pollution Control Division have worked to implement standards to clean up tailpipe emissions from vehicles. But of note here, the Greenhouse Gas Transportation Planning Standard was a strategy in that first roadmap with an intent to achieve 1.5 million metric ton reduction by the 2030 horizon line. Next slide, please. So just wanted to talk like big picture here for a minute on the transportation sector. This graphic is really just showing relative percentage of emissions from various vehicle class types. And the important item to note here is that among these various sectors of transportation emissions, our light duty vehicles are the largest fraction of emissions that contribute to greenhouse gas emissions from on-road sources. And so as we think about strategies, a big picture on how to reduce those emissions, there are kind of three big bin areas. One is to increase the efficiency of the vehicle technology. Another is to use lower carbon intensive fuels. And the third of which is change how we travel and transport goods. And that's the tie-in point with the greenhouse gas planning rule. This third strategy is really looking for ways to incentivize and create multimodal opportunities that reduce single occupancy vehicle travel. And so that's, again, just sort of big picture, how the planning rule, that focus area of the planning rule. Next slide, please. So onto the standard itself, it was adopted by the Transportation Commission in December of 2021. Some key high-level requirements of the rule are that it essentially requires CDOT and the 5 MPOs to create long-range transportation plans that provide more travel choices, which result in reduced GHG emissions. And it was really determined through the strategic discussions that thinking about our future planning efforts and the way that we build our transportation system is the best stage at which to contemplate ways that we can systematically improve travel choice. And so ultimately, that is kind of the key foundational concept of the greenhouse gas planning rule. Next slide. So this is probably not new to anyone, but just wanted to share this in advance of my next slide. So we have our 5 MPO areas, as well as then all the geographic regions outside the 5 MPO areas. And so as far as the planning rule is concerned, CDOT is in charge of the emissions that result from the infrastructure in the non-MPO areas. So there are targets set for each area, and CDOT has to estimate the emissions for all the areas in the gray part of this image. Next slide, please. So diving into the rule a little bit more, just to give some details, this is the table directly from the rule that establishes what emission reductions need to be achieved by the 5 MPO regions, as well as CDOT in the non-MPO areas. No need to go into each of the targets here, but it was developed through the rulemaking. These targets were developed through the rulemaking process while considering how travel choices and transit and land use can play together to create a successful opportunity to reduce emissions. I guess the tie-in point that's important to note here is that across all the MPO areas, as well as CDOT for the 2030 horizon year, you can see that totality is intended to achieve 1.5 million metric tons per year of emission reductions. Next slide, please. So we're going to jump into a little bit more about how the rule works here. So there are kind of there's a key foundational element to the planning rule itself. It's how do you go about estimating the emissions and demonstrating compliance? It's really a combination of 2 items. One is using travel demand modeling, which is common for these long-range plans. The outcome of travel demand models are items such as VMT, congestion and speeds. With those outputs from the travel demand model, we can then use EPA's MOVES model, which is a sophisticated model that helps to estimate the emissions that are resulting from tailpipes from various types of vehicles on the road. Those two models are combined together to ultimately, based on the plan, estimate the totality of emissions that are anticipated to result from the plan that's being adopted. So there are two major elements then. First, there is a baseline plan, which is a plan that was in place prior to when these rules were adopted. So the long range plan, the RTP or CDOT's 10-year plan. And then there are the future plans, which is what we've been talking about today for CDOT, the next 10-year plan. So there are two modeling runs, one for the baseline plan that stays stagnant. That will always be that same baseline plan from the plan that was adopted prior to January 30th of 2022. And then each time there's a future update to a long range plan by an MPO or CDOT's 10-year plan, a new compliance demonstration calculation has to be done through these modeling methods. Next slide. So this is more of a graphical overview of that process. We essentially go through the long range planning document development. Then there's a step to determine the impacts of that plan through this modeling exercise. And then there is a review between what was our baseline emissions that we anticipated from the original plan and what are the emissions going to be based on the revised plan. And so then comparing those two plans, MPO and CDOT has to demonstrate that they've achieved the reductions that are in those tables that I showed in the earlier slide. And if through the modeling effort, we're able to demonstrate compliance based on project selection and those infrastructure changes, then you're in compliance. If not, there is a secondary process known as GHG mitigation measures that can be done off model to help the MPO or CDOT come and demonstrate compliance with the components of the rule. Next slide, please. So here's again a brief overview of how that works. We go through, we do our project selection, incorporating into the plan. Then we step into the modeling process. If in fact we can't model, we're not demonstrating compliance, there are a couple options here. One would be to go back and revisit the project mix and rerun the model to see if we can demonstrate those reductions over time. If not, you could have the opportunity to do off-model benefit calculations using the mitigation action plan. That is based on CDOT's policy directive 1610. So we have methods designed and developed for how to calculate emission reductions from a variety of different projects. And so those are the primary mechanisms and the only mechanisms we've seen used so far through our work with MPOs and for CDOT so far. Within the rule, there is basically a opportunity if for some reason an MPO or CDOT were to bring a non-compliant plan to the Transportation Commission, then the Transportation Commission has the authority to restrict funding within those plans and redirect it towards projects that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a quick overview of the process of once you've gone through the planning process, there's a requirement to develop a report of these modeling exercises and demonstrating compliance. That is known as a greenhouse gas transportation report. That must be submitted to the Transportation Commission. It is, presumably through the diligent work in developing the plan, we'll be able to demonstrate compliance. It's put in front of the Transportation Commission for their review and acceptance by resolution. Next slide, please. Next couple of slides, I'm just going to give a brief overview of the mitigation action plan, the mitigation measures alternative. Again, based on policy directive 1610, these are tools that can be used if your project selection and then the modeling of those projects in the future plan don't show the reductions necessary. The MPO or CDOT can choose off-model approaches using PD 1610 to develop and fund ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so, let's see, one key element of this using the mitigation action plan is that ultimately, if a MPO chooses to do so, or CDOT, it does then trigger a requirement whereby those mitigation measures need to be tracked and then updates reported to the Transportation Commission annually. So right now, DRCOG and CDOT are the only two agencies using the mitigation action plan. So we've been providing report outs on April 1st each year of all the various projects that we've committed to for mitigation measures and our progress on those mitigation measures. Next slide, please. So these next two slides are just some examples I wanted to share with you just in terms of what are mitigation measures. And so they can be any variety of these elements, but committing to various bicycle infrastructure projects, pedestrian infrastructure, micro mobility programs, transit programs. Next slide, please. Transportation demand management. I think we've got our graphics a little screwed up here, pardon me. Medium and heavy duty electrification. And so there's a whole variety of suite of different approaches to mitigating GHGs outside the modeling exercise. And so again, PD 1610 gives the details on the methodologies on how to quantify those types of programs. Next slide. So circling back into CDOT's work and tying it back into the 10-year plan that we've been discussing today, CDOT has gone through this exercise once in September 2022, had updated its 10-year plan, done the modeling work and the modeling exercises, and then submitted a GHG report to the commission, which was accepted by resolution. We're now again in our next 10-year statewide planning effort, including the update to the 10-year plan. This effort is again will trigger the GHG planning rule requirements. We will, the projects incorporated in the 10-year plan will be subject to a new compliance demonstration and report out to the Transportation Commission. So as I mentioned earlier, CDOT's responsible for ensuring all the infrastructure outside the MPO area boundaries are able to demonstrate, the future infrastructure that we're proposing will be able to demonstrate the reduction levels from the planning rule. And one of the key elements of this planning process is it does provide flexibility for a mix of projects. And so that's a really important aspect. Next slide, please. So kind of tying it all back together with the transportation planning region considerations, just want to note that regional plans will best support our ability to comply with the planning rule by ensuring that the people of Colorado have appropriate transportation choice, emphasizing bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure where appropriate, based on regional community needs, emphasizing transit enhancements where appropriate, again, based on regional and community needs, and prioritizing projects in regional plans that provide true transportation choice and help with achieving statewide reduction levels in the non-MPO areas. So I think that's my last slide. I have my contact information here if anybody does have questions or wants to follow up, but happy to open it up for questions.
Questions or comments?
I had a couple questions if you get a chance, Gary.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I guess a couple things that come to my mind as I'm hearing this, and I appreciate the presentation, Chris. So thank you very much. What are we using for actual data and testing? I mean, modeling is one thing, but I can plug anything into a model and make it say whatever I want. What is CDOT using to actually gather its data? A, that's my first question. B, how close are we to meeting those standards right now? Are we actually meeting those standards? And then C, would it be possible at the end of 2025 for STAC to actually see the data and see where we're at on our CO2 standard and see whether these modelings are actually effective and if they're working or not.
Darius, I saw you pop your hand up. Did you want to speak
I
first?
did.
Or
So,
I can
happy to answer those questions, Commissioner Ross. I think for a couple of them, I'm going to turn it over to DTD Deputy Director Eric Sabina, and he can answer some of those questions in regards to the data itself. He helps lead the modeling effort. So, Eric, if you could.
Sure. Thanks, Darius. Thank you, Commissioner Ross, for the question. There are long answers and short answers to this, and I would be happy to devote any amount of time that the STAC feels appropriate to go into the details that are behind the commissioner's question. One of the things that's very challenging, and to be blunt about it, the reason that we use models to do this analysis is because we really don't have any way of actually detecting greenhouse gas emissions from our regions and our state. There's not a little filter sensor that we can stick out there and see how much greenhouse gas is actually flowing out. We can do that in very specialized instances, obviously, like on particular, oil and gas wells where we can, look at a particular individual like that. But, from the millions of cars and, the millions of, gas-fired furnaces like I have in my house, and many other such sources, we really don't have a way to do that, and that is why we've turned to modeling. As for sort of the background of your question, Commissioner, really relates to the credibility of modeling, which I totally understand. It's a very sort of strange and arcane activity that people like me do, and people are quite justified in asking us to explain how we do it and why it's credible. There's a really long answer to that. The short version of it is that we spend a lot of time gathering data about how people travel. We're actually in the field right now, as I think I've presented to you before, with doing a travel survey. We spend a ton of time gathering traffic counts all around the state. We do between 2,000 and 3,000 traffic counts around the state every year. We have around 120 permanent counters that are counting 24/7 all across the state to help us with this. We gather a ton of data from the transit providers that that they have on the boardings of all of those providers all around the state. I could go on like this for like an hour at least, and we obviously don't have time to do that. But as we are building these models and verifying that they're reasonable, we are starting with surveys like the one we're in the field with now that gather information from people on their travel activities. And then once we've built the model, we're checking that model against observed data, such as the traffic counts and the transit boarding data that I mentioned, and many other sources of data. So that's a real short answer to your question. If the STAC would like, I'd be happy to provide a more in-depth discussion of how modeling is done here and how we verify that it's as accurate as we can possibly make it be.
Eric, I appreciate the comments. I guess, this plan has serious economic impacts on our regions, right? And so therefore, I'm always critical of modeling, because modeling's only as good as the formulation you're using and the data that you are imposing upon the modeling, right? And slight tweaks to that can make that modeling say whatever an individual or institution would like that model to say. So therefore, I think it's imperative we stay skeptical of modeling, because true testing is what tells us whether our modeling is actually working, right? So I appreciate modeling. It gives us a large target to shoot for, but it doesn't really give us definitive answers, in my opinion. But I'd be happy to get more information from you on that. I guess the other thing, we're charged with meeting ozone standards. Greenhouse standards are secondary. So some of this is just, in my opinion, Eric, we're rolling the dice here a little bit. And again, we have serious economic impacts with what is being proposed for resolutions towards these. And I would like to see, as a STAC member, I would like to see the actual data at the end of the year and see where we're at as a state and where we're at as these corridors to whether how far we are out of whack personally.
So Commissioner, if I could answer that, I think we'd be happy to do a presentation going into the data in more detail. I'd say right now that for the current 10-year plan, we are in compliance. We're in compliance due to mitigation measures, however. So that allowed the plan to go forward. Now, modeling isn't, as you had mentioned, isn't necessarily everything. And Eric and his team does a lot of work in order to get it to get an accurate picture of what the state will look like or potentially look like in the future. But it also is taking a look at future modeling. But there is also other areas where actual, I wouldn't want to say actual data, but forecast of what's happening right now by sector that's developed by the Air Pollution Control Division. That's not part of CDOT, but they do provide that information as well to see where the transportation sector as a whole, which not only includes light duty vehicles and stuff that's on the roadway, which we're concerned about, but also, what else that is using gasoline, diesel, lawnmowers, off-road vehicles, aviation, which is outside of the scope of this. So we're happy to bring forward that presentation on that data. We can add it to the work program for you to take a look at it. And
I apologize. I got a couple other questions, and I know.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Commissioner. I'm sorry.
So I apologize, but what are you guys going to do to ensure that the bike ped transit projects are actually offsetting these light duty emissions? So how are we going to find out that data? And then when are you going to revisit these projects to make sure if they're working, if we're not reaching these standards?
Excellent question. So based off of it's called Policy Directive 1610. It was passed by the Commission in 2022. The bike and ped, let's take that for an example, has certain expected benefit based off of trips taken with that mode versus a single occupancy vehicle. And those potential reduction levels based on trip are recorded in that policy directive. And the mitigation action plan that is developed each April records based off of the mitigation actions that either the MPO or the state has said they were going to do, is recorded in that and presented to the Transportation Commission every year based on what's being developed and what the potential impact is.
And I appreciate that, Darius, but listen, in the spirit of New Year's resolutions, I can make a plan to lose 100 pounds this year, right? And I can model that I'm going to look like Fabio, okay? Doesn't mean at the end of the year that I've lost 100 pounds or that I look like Fabio other than in my mind, right? And so that's why we have to keep track of this and figure out if these measures are actually making a difference or if we're just drumming our chests saying that we're making a difference, right? So we're having real economic impact on our communities. The state's going backwards in business reliability and businesses wanting to be here in a hurry. Just 5 years ago, we were in the top 10 for businesses wanting to relocate to Colorado. Now we're in the bottom 10, and it's all due to these overarching regulations that we continue to impose throughout our state, not just in transportation, but beyond. And there's no holding back. There's no throttling back. All we do is double down, and we're not making serious measurable differences other than economic impacts that are driving businesses away. So that's my soapbox. But Darius, I appreciate you allowing me to ask a few questions.
Absolutely. And I think, Commissioner, with the chair's permission, of course, we could probably have this as a potential future presentation to go through and really dive deep in the data.
Any other comments or questions?
I just have one kind of along the same line. Is there anywhere in the state that we actually physically measure greenhouse gas? So we have all the modeling, but I know like USGS can measure water. Is there anywhere in the state where we could actually measure the greenhouse gas just for a specific region?
Yeah, and that's as I had mentioned, the Air Pollution Control Division does those estimates on actuals and what's actually being the actual inventory, and we're happy to provide that data at a future STAC meeting as well. I don't have it offhand though.
Thank you. That would be interesting.
Absolutely.
I don't remember in the greenhouse gas stuff when I was on the commission. Do they look at the offset of, especially in rural areas, it's tough to vary offset with transit, bike, ped, those things. Just you're not going to get enough people to shift with what they need for their daily use of transportation, regardless of what it is that but just that they have to move around. It's very hard to transition to those in a lot of the rural areas. And also a lot of it's transitioning through our areas that's not in our areas to have any impact on. It's getting to the metro areas. Is there any look at if we say, well, we can't do these improvement projects or these preservation projects because we have to put money toward transit or bike ped in these areas to offset greenhouse gas emissions? Is there any look at those impacts of delaying a project for maintenance and operations and preservation that gets more costly and actually generates more greenhouse gas because we're not doing the maintenance and preservation when it needs to be done or early enough? And we actually make much bigger projects, more costly projects in the future because we're not doing things now to preserve the system or to do minor mobility improvements to the traveling public with roads and things for the traffic to actually get through more efficiently. Is there any modeling or looking at that in the greenhouse gas models of if
Thank you,
we
Mr.
offset
Chair.
those?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll turn it over to Eric in just a second because I think he can get into more detail. But keep in mind that when we're doing the modeling and doing the evaluation, this is determined on regionally significant capacity projects. So what we're taking a look at is trying to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas in the future based off of the planning levels. And preservation projects or straight resurfacing, where they're not adding any capacity, is neutral, is not considered in the modeling itself. So I do want to make that that particular point clear on there. But the whole point of the planning standard is to allow for different mix of projects to come forward on there. It doesn't necessarily mean that all capacity projects are completely out the door, but being able to see what we can do to mitigate some of the potential impacts if it is determined that that's an absolute need based off of the transportation plans that are approved. So Eric, I think you had a couple of other comments, so go ahead.
Yeah, if I can engage in a little bit of levity, Chair Beatty, or you're really laying yourself open for a long, nerdy presentation about modeling. So you can always take
I want to
that
make
back
sure
if
we're
you
actually
want.
reaching goals and not just saying we're meeting a goal and
No, I totally hear
spending
you.
a lot of money on stuff that's not going to do anything to actually meet a goal. So
Yeah, I totally hear you. What I would say is just to very briefly talk about modeling, and obviously it sounds like we need a longer conversation about modeling and data. But part of the virtue of modeling, of course, is we're trying to look at the future. Obviously, we can't measure the future, stating the obvious to all, I know. So that's part of what models are for too, is to look into the future as best we can. The other thing that models are really good for is looking at the interrelationships between when you do some land use change or something, let's say, and then you serve it with transit and you add a managed lane over here or whatever it is you do. Obviously, I'm talking a lot of urban area type stuff, but anyway, what is the combined result of doing all those things simultaneously? It's really hard to take any shot at that kind of question without using models. So, so partially answering your question, which some of what you were saying was related to this interrelationship question, that's part of why we use models. But anyway, I'll stop now. But it sounds like we can check in with you and Vice Chair Williams about whether we'd like to do a longer presentation on this topic at another date.
Steve.
I appreciate this. We we have discussions on modeling versus measuring quite often in the context of other environmental discussions, particularly with emissions and pollution all the time. And I appreciate what's being asked is well, I want to first say I appreciate Eric's explanation of how modeling can be helpful for future estimates and forecasting. I think because nobody does have a crystal ball, but you can show real data, actual, measured instead of modeled historically. And I can understand that as you show that historically over time, then you can get kind of a trend and identify, because hindsight's 2020, a little bit of the factors and attributes that contribute to some of those actual measured numbers. And so I think it's more of an and, not an or. And the right tool being used the right way will really help us be able to go to our constituents and be able to explain what's going on, so it doesn't look like it's this modeling that's done in some office and some Excel spreadsheet by some analyst who's never been on the ground or really looking at the actual measured impact. We go through that with our concerns about Suncor, industrial pollution, I mean, greenhouse gases, ozone, those things are part of all of that, but we also have to look at what's actually measured. So if we succeed, we'll be able to give the members of STAC and the other elected officials around the state reasonable explanations they could bring back to their constituents and stakeholders. We're just not doing that. And so I think we need to do, I mean, maybe we are, but maybe we could do it better. Like put it in the perspective of if I'm Kevin Ross, how am I going to explain this to a farmer who's now got or a business who's now got an additional expense that they would not otherwise have? We have to make it understandable. And when we keep that gap between understandable and reasonable, we lose a little bit of the trust. And I do believe we need to address greenhouse gases. I do believe we need to address our climate. But we need to also work together on how to be able to make it understandable for those who are particularly going to be impacted by the remedies to address those issues.
Jerry, you're muted.
Darius.
I'll just, unless there's any other questions or comments from members of STAC, I'll leave us with this. I think this is, appreciate all the suggestions and being able to get more information, and appreciate the comments on being able to take this back in understandable format, because yes, this is, gets into the complicated realm and being able to explain that. But to leave off with some thoughts on here, it's a standard that's set in our planning rules that was set by the legislature, and we'll try to make sure that we'll continue to have those conversations in order to make choices, because this is not the only thing that determines the choice for the development of transportation plan. The availability of resources, funding, the funding type, the needs in the different areas, all of that stuff rolls into developing not only the statewide plan, but also the 10-year plan. And happy to have this as another item on the STAC plan in order to give back some of this information, so you can take it back to your constituents and be able to explain some of this stuff that's coming out of in regards to the greenhouse gas standard, which is, by the way, one tool in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. It isn't everything. As one of the slides that Chris had presented, there are many different policy measures that are being put in place in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This is just one of them, and it's not designed to be the key catalyst that reduces everything. And based on some preliminary numbers, which I pulled up on here, it does seem like there is some difference. GHG per capita based off of numbers from 2019 to 2023 decreased by 0.5 million metric tons. Excuse me, tons, not million metric tons. I apologize, tons. Let me get that correct. So, but we can deep dive in some of that data and present some of the data we have and compile it and make it a little bit more. We can provide context to this topic and answer some of the STAC questions at a future month if the chair would like us to do that.
Yeah, that all sounds good. So guess we'll move on to rural transportation planning.
Apologies, I think this is me again. I was just writing down some notes. So this is the last topic of the day, so we're well ahead of schedule. So folks are going to have some time over some extra time at the end here. But this is a update on the Rural Planning Assistance Program, and if folks remember, these are the funds that are provided by CDOT to all the entities that have rural areas in order to help them with their rural planning. And this is the funds that we have provided. And we wanted to give a quick update on where things are at, give some reminders, and to talk about some next steps with that. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Just a quick announcement. One of the recommendations was to have a TPR administrator meeting for TPR administrators to get information from CDOT staff and to talk amongst themselves about managing their programs. And that's scheduled for a virtual meeting at February 6th of 2025. And some of this information would be included at that meeting as well. But we wanted to provide it to you so you can see where we're at with the expenditures in this particular program, because that was a discussion item in June of last year, I believe. Next slide, please. So as a overview, CDOT through the state planning and research dollars provides funds to each of the rural TPRs, so that includes all of them except two of the members on STAC, with funds to administer their programs. These funds can be used for various items, include mainly for travel, but also personnel expenses. It can be used for public participation expenses, mailings, conducting meetings, personal expenses to run TPR activities, to conduct those meetings, travel, as I had mentioned, and other related expenses. We do have a rural planning assistance program guide, which is available on the website for TPRs, that is available, and folks can reference on allowable activities and other information. These funds are only good for the current fiscal year. So from July 1st to June 30th, any unused funds get swept. Do you want to make that clear? If there is funds left on the table, it gets swept, and we start from scratch beginning in July 1st. The total amount that's allocated is $204,000. So that was a discussion with STAC previously, based off of some increased needs and development of websites and some of the other things. This was the discussion that increasing that amount by about 50,000 was prudent in order for TPRs to meet their obligations and to pay for these programs, which was approved. So next slide. And we expect that amount to continue into FY26, by the way, no expected reduction at all. This was the formula for the amount that was allocated to each TPR, with a minimum base of 8,000, additional funds based on the amount of distance to CDOT headquarters, which would be the travel component for in-person TPR meetings, additional funds allocated to the chair and vice chair, based off of increased travel for the Transportation Commission meetings. And then administration for tribal nations would go to 1 TPR and additional allocation. This program distribution will be discussed annually and will be a June topic. So any changes to this distribution can be discussed at the at the May in-person meeting in order to finalize the budget for FY26. Next slide. And this is as of December 18th, so it is a couple weeks old. So if there's any payments that have been done since that time, it's not in here. Do want to give all members of the STAC a kind of an overview of where we're at currently. So as you can see, some members have used about half their funds, which would be expected, but there have some members that have not used any of their funds. And so the message that we want to get from here is to get in the reimbursement requests early and often in order to be able to use those funds and not leave anything at the table. Because once the fiscal year ends, then and the funds get swept, you can't use them anymore, and we can't reimburse you per state and federal guidelines. So we want to provide this reminder to help get in those reimbursement requests and be able to pay for those activities. So this is in the packet. We won't spend too much time on here, but you're able to see where your current balance is, and reaching out to your your liaison with CDOT headquarters. We can provide you updates on this on a regular ongoing basis if required. Excuse me. Next slide, please. For the virtual meeting, this is the basic agenda, but there may be, based on conversations with your administrator, there can be other items for coordination, other agenda items that may be brought up to check up on how administration is going. In particular, following up on any of the remaining items that were part of the recommendation as part of the study that occurred in last year, review of reimbursement request finances. So talking about this potential topic in more detail, talking about the MMOF selection process, which based off of the reports earlier, that was an ongoing discussion topic, and then identifies next steps for continued coordination and collaboration and learning from each other on best practice ideas in order to make this as easy as possible within the confines that are allowed within federal and state statute and rules. Next slide, please. So yeah, honestly, this was going to be a quick topic, but I did want to bring up the current state of the finances to show where everybody's at. But the virtual TPR administrators meeting, the next one's on February 6th at 1 p.m. Invitations will go out shortly to those. So hopefully a lot of people can attend and get information out of it. And then there'll potentially be an in-person meeting in May after the STAC meeting to kind of align with that. Additionally, at the May STAC meeting, we'll talk about the program distribution for the Rural Assistance Program at that time and come up with a potential budget that can be included in the state planning and research work program for fiscal year 28 and get those dollars allocated. Now, I'm sorry, I neglected to mention this. If we could go back to the table real fast. If you see here, it says 192,000 was allocated and there's 204,000 available. The difference is, and we do need to, we're trying to get this corrected as we speak, is the additional funds. We only allocated partial funds for the chair and vice chair. We're trying to get those funds over to the Eastern TPR through an amendment. It does take some time, but those funds will be distributed for additional travel for chair meeting. So did want to mention that that's the discrepancy between the two amounts. Happy to answer any questions if there are any regarding this topic, and hope to see your administrators at the virtual meeting in a month or so.
I have one quick question. Can you use any of that funding for trying to increase public participation, such as providing a meal with a meeting or something like that, especially during the planning plan update, is that an allowable expense? I think I've heard it is not, that you can't pay for food at a meeting.
So I'm reading through the allowable expenses here, so I'm going to read off this. Meetings at which food and beverage will be provided must be a formally advertised public meeting that focuses on informing the general public about a project or program and allows them an opportunity to engage with content. The primary audience must be the general public and community members who are not regular participants in the transportation planning process, i.e. RPC TPR members, nor are they transportation professionals at any level. So based on this, and I'm going to look to my staff to see if I'm making a wrong assumption, that the answer is yes. The problem is it can't be for like a regular TPR meeting. It must be for public outreach meetings that is advertised, and the purpose is to get the general public's participation in there, if that makes sense.
It does. So, but it makes
Thank
it
you.
tough when majority of people we get are the people that are involved all the time. So it's when you're trying to get a few more, it gets, yeah, okay. It just gets tough always. So, all right. Any other questions on the planning? Seeing none, I think that covers our meeting. Our next one is February 6th. So. Correct? Yeah. So, all righty. I guess that does it. If there's any other comments or questions for the group? Seeing none? Okay, thank you. Everybody have a good snowy, cold day.
Thank you. Have a great day.